You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Welcome to Toronto Sports Rush. I am joined once again by Pierre McGuire because it's Monday and it's McGuire Monday, and it is an all-Olympiad edition, probably for the next couple, Pierre. 148 NHL players are in the Olympics this year, and 124 of them are first-time Olympians for obvious reasons.
Yeah, we haven't had Olympics with best on best, and it really isn't best on best without the Russians. Think about it, how many more we'd have if the Russians were there. And I don't want to get into the politics of it.
It's not a political statement, it's a hockey statement.
Yeah, exactly. But we haven't had this since 2014, and I'll never forget that gold medal game from Sochi like it was yesterday. I thought Babcock coached fantastically well for Canada. They destroyed the Swedes. That's one of the best Canadian teams I've ever seen at the Olympics. And, I go back as far as 98, 02, 6, 10, and then you have 14. I'm excited the fact that what you just said, Kyle, we actually have NHL players there. Yeah. We get to see McDavid. We get to see McKinnon. We get to see all these top guys from around the world. Timmy Stützle, for Germany. Leon Draisaitl, all these phenomenal players. I think it's going to be fantastic.
Well, Pierre, we get best on best hockey again, and Canada has been the victor in the last 4 international tournaments featuring best on best. Of course, the 2010 Vancouver Olympics, 2014 Sochi, the World Cup of Hockey in 2016, and last year's 4 Nations. Mm-hmm. That is a lot of pressure for any team, even as superstar-laden as they are, to live up to.
Whoa, I think you're right about that. There's going to be a lot of pressure, and it's going to start right away. I bet you the first practices for most of the guys, they're used to practicing a lot. They're probably a little bit like, really? This is the Olympics? I'm here, and they're looking around.
Yeah.
Usually you don't have that with all those experienced players. You'll have a little of that. You won't have a lot of it. You'll have a little of it. I think the biggest thing for Canada is establishing lines. It's going to be establishing deep pairings, and it's going to be establishing who's going to be the starting goalie. I think for a lot of those other countries, Americans, I think, have their lines. I think that, the Swedes have their lines. All those, but for Canada, there's just such an array of talent. I think they're going to have to decide how they want to play their lines, how they want to do their deep pairings. And quite frankly, Jordan Binnington, you talked about the 4 Nations, Kyle. Jordan Binnington played in the 4 Nations, but since then, he hasn't played particularly well. Is he actually going to be the goalie of record?
Yeah, that's a very interesting conversation with Binnington because he was at his best in the 4 Nations. He's playing for a fairly weak hockey team right now. It's hard to say how much that's affecting him. Maybe he can turn it back on. But let's go back to what you just talked about with the spectacle of looking around for all these new players. Because of those 4 previous victories on best hockey I mentioned for Team Canada, only 2 of Canada's players, depending on your mileage and where you're from, not you specifically, but the audience, played on all 4 of those teams. And that's, of course, Crosby and Doughty. Yeah. The rest of those guys, to think they're not susceptible to feeling the awe of an Olympic moment, that would be a very ignorant thing to say because it's bigger than the NHL. This is a global tournament, and the entire world is watching.
I'll never forget being inside the Olympic bubble in 2002 in Salt Lake, especially after what happened in 98 with Team Canada. And the pressure that was brought to bear on Pat Quinn, Wayne Gretzky, and that entire Canadian group. If you remember, during that Olympic Games, it was Wayne Gretzky that did something that we don't usually see at the Olympics. He decided to have a press conference and go after the officials and go after all the other teams and their players. And it was to take away the pressure from his players and put it on his back. He was trying to, get people to talk about him rather than talk about the team because of what you're talking about. The Olympic pressure is way different. And until you're in the Olympic bubble, you may think you don't know. And I can tell you, I've coached in 2 Stanley Cup final. I've broadcast 18 of them. There's pressure. I get it. But when you get in that Olympic bubble, it's just really different. And you make a great point about that, Kyle.
And let's also talk about the fact that one of the most difficult parts of these international tournaments is you're suddenly thrust onto lines and a team with a bunch of guys you don't normally skate with other than the odd time. Now, Canada's returning 19 players from the 4 Nations Cup, which should, in fact, be a tremendous advantage for them. But the U.S. actually has more than that. But 19 is a good number. How much will that allow them to step into game mode as quickly as possible and have less adjustment time with one another?
A lot. I think there's a really valid point there. But the other part that I like, the coaching staff that's around John Cooper. John Cooper is a really good salesman. He's a pitch man. He's not a great tactician. That's why he's got Pete DeBoer there. Pete DeBoer is a brilliant tactician. John Cooper knows how to facilitate create roles and have his players buy into the roles. He also knows how to sell a plan. And John's so good at it. Will they miss Sorelli because of that? Yeah, they will. Will they miss Braden Point because of that? Yeah, they will, because they're used to Cooper playing for him in Tampa. But I think the maturity of the group for Canada anyways, especially with Sid being named captain, if you don't listen to Sid and you're a player on that team, you're not really going to amount to very much because you don't recognize the greatness of Sid. So there's a lot here that's really positive for Canada, more positive than negative.
Yeah, and I imagine to most people they would think, oh, well, of course Crosby's the captain, but the actual naming of him as such, it's an important step for a team so that they have someone to point questions to, because Sidney has by far the best resume in international hockey on this team. Going back to what we said earlier about how many times he's been at this level, he'll be a calm presence, and he's having a resurgent season in the NHL. So on all levels, he deserves that seat.
Oh my gosh, go back to the '04 World Junior. He's the youngest Canadian to ever score a goal at the World Junior in Helsinki, Finland. He was 16 years of age. They don't win the gold that year. They lose to get silver. But the next year he plays on a line with Patrice Bergeron and Corey Perry in 2005. They beat Ovechkin and Malkin in the gold medal game. That's the greatness of Crosby right there. Then Crosby goes into the NHL. Think about it. '08 final, '09 cup, 10, the golden goal. You know, like his resume is crazy to your point. And it just keeps getting enhanced and enhanced and enhanced. You know, he's won 2 Conn Smythes. He's won 3 Stanley Cups. He's won 2 Olympic golds. He's won the World Cup of Hockey. Like, you go look at all that last year, the World Hockey Championships. You know, you just go look at the resume. It's crazy how good it is. It really is.
It's crazy, and it's never let up for a second. He has been at the top level of international play for his entire career, and quite obviously the NHL as well. Let's go into their schedule a little bit, because they by no means are starting this off with softball games. They kick things. The men's tournament kicks off Wednesday. Canada kicks things off Thursday, 10:40 a.m. Eastern time for the viewers if they're having trouble finding the schedule, against Czechia, and then the following day, 3:10 p.m. Eastern time against the Swiss. Those are not easy hockey games.
No, and the Swiss really play Canada hard in the Olympics. I was there in '06. Canada lost. I was there in 10. Canada lost. And that's when they switched from Marty Brodeur to Roberto Luongo. People forget that. And you go back to '02, Kyle, that's where, you know, the Canadians lose and they have a hard time playing in the tournament. They go from Curtis Joseph to Marty Brodeur. Marty had that happen to him in 2010, and it was the Swiss that created that. The Swiss are a problem. I don't know if they're going to have enough offense to beat Canada. It's just like, I don't know if, you know, I know Pasternak's a big part of what Czechia is doing. I don't know if they have enough depth offense to get the job done against Canada that's going to roll 4 lines and probably really lean on the Czech defense. And, you know, I know the Czech defense really well. They're not at the same level as most of the other defenses in this tournament, just because that's where their program is right now cyclically.
Okay, and we have to talk about the U.S. team too as well if we're giving a preview, because by all the expectations of this tournament are that Canada and the U.S. will meet in the gold medal. Of course, there's a lot of potential for that not to happen, but let's focus on that team because they are currently our greatest hockey rivalry. The U.S. opens their schedule on Thursday as well versus Latvia, and then they have a day off, and then Saturday versus Denmark. This team has not won a gold medal since the Miracle on Ice 46 years ago, and it's a nation that has grown in prominence in hockey ever since then, kind of reaching a crescendo right now in both the men's and women's game, which we'll get into. They are starving for a gold medal in the American hockey program.
They were close in '02 in Salt Lake. Legendary Herb Brooks coached that team. Canada beat them. Great Canadian team. In 2010, they went to overtime against Canada in Vancouver. Crosby with the golden goal. I talked to Ronnie Wilson, who was their coach, the next day at the Vancouver airport, and he said to me, Pierre, I told our assistant coaches, if we don't score in the first 3 minutes, we're not winning this overtime, because they had expended so much energy to get it to overtime. They didn't have a lot left in the tank. And then in 14, Danny Bilesman was a coach, and I can tell you right now that they just were not prepared to play. I'm not saying that's a knock on Danny. It's just the way they built their team. They had a lot of managerial issues at that point. David Poyle was supposed to be the GM. He got hit in the eye with a puck before the tournament started, and he wasn't the GM of record, which created some internal machinations they couldn't overcome. So really, this is their best chance, I think. Yes. Since 1980. Honestly, even though they were close in 10, they were close in '02, this is probably the best chance they're going to have. And their depth down the middle is really good. And the thing that I think will surprise people, how quick they're going to transition the puck from defense to offense, Kyle. That transition game of the Americans is going to be really good.
And very similar to the Canadians, they are going to have a lot of team chemistry right out of the gate because they're returning 21 players from the Four Nations. But if you look at the names who they've added since then, these are elite hockey players. Quinn Hughes, Jackson Lacombe, Tage Thompson, and Clayton Keller are being added to this team on top of the Four Nations last year, in which they were this close to winning.
So this is for all the fans that are close to Buffalo, New York. Obviously, we're playing to the Toronto audience. Tage Thompson's going to be probably the third or fourth center for the Team USA. He's a 40 to 50 goal scorer. Yeah. And he's 6'6". He's all a 6'6", and he leans on you. He can shoot the puck like nobody's business. You raised a great point on Clayton Keller, by the way. Clayton Keller lost his father earlier this year. He's playing with a lot of emotion. He's been a great international player for Team USA going back to when he played for them at the World Junior. He was a really good college player at Boston University. I've watched this game forever and ever. He's a tremendous kid, a workaholic both in and outside of the rink. This team's good. And again, what I think will surprise people, and it's something to pay attention to, how quickly they're going to transition the puck from defense to offense. Their puck movement on the back end is phenomenal. It really is.
Yeah, and to be noted, Thompson and Keller helped lead that U.S. team last year to a gold medal, which I read this morning, a 92-year drought in the World Hockey Championships for them. Wow. And then, now that they've tasted that international success and they've been added to this team, there's a leadership that Canada, it's always sort of just assumed there's guys in the locker room that have the experience and that leadership quality. But this U.S. team is not to be taken lightly in that department either. No,
well, one of the big things is Matthew Tkachuk. Brady and Matthew. Matthew's won 2 Stanley Cups. He's been to the final 3 times. The show they put on last year at the Four Nations on the Saturday night street fight in Montreal, everybody remembers. That's earned them a lot of points with USA Hockey. I think the biggest thing, too, is, this for Toronto. Austin Matthew has not had a great year this year. He hasn't. We all know that. No. But he's starting to heat up. That might be bad news for everybody. And when he's insulated with Jack Eichel and Tage Thompson down the middle, that's a lot of insulation. I don't think teams are going to have an easy time matching up on Team USA just because of their center ice depth.
And we've talked a lot on this channel about the players who were left off the Canadian roster, but let's quickly have you discuss some of the players left off the U.S. roster, because Jason Robertson and Cole Caulfield were both left off this team, and they could make almost any other team in the world easily.
Shockingly so. I'm so glad you said that. For Cole, I watch all his games. I do all the post-game shows for the Montreal Canadiens, and I would just tell you right now, Cole Caulfield's been one of the most explosive scorers late in games in the NHL right now. He's been phenomenal. He's one of the clutch players in the league right now. I was really surprised. And then Jason Robertson's had this unbelievable season. I know it's a contract year for him, but he's had this unbelievable season down in Dallas. And quite frankly, they know his game really well, Team USA. So I'm surprised they left those two off. I'm really surprised they left Lane Hudson off too. Lane Hudson's had a phenomenal year for the Montreal Canadiens. But I'll see their point on this. They have Quinn Hughes. They have Zach Werenski. They got a lot of offense on the back end, but I was surprised they left those 2 forwards off the team in Caulfield and Robertson.
Well, they're getting into that same Canadian territory where they have an embarrassment of riches now, and unfortunately there will be all-stars left off this team, just like in Team Canada, who could field 2 teams each and every Olympics. Let's move into the women's game now, Pierre, because we know what's happening here. We know what's crescendoing. We know where this tournament is likely to be headed. Team Canada plays today. They play at, let me just quickly double check the schedule. They play 3:10, 3:15 against Czechia, and the U.S. plays Swiss. These are good hockey games today for both these teams for the tune-up for the clash that comes tomorrow between these 2 titans of women's hockey.
It's unbelievable. You know what? As excited I am for the men to get going, I'm really pumped for the game Tuesday. Now I know they have to play Canada plays Czechia, and I know that USA plays Swiss. I don't expect either one of those games to be close. I've watched every single one of the women's games so far in the tournament because I'm doing work for NBC Sports Digital and calling a lot of the women's games. And I would tell you this, it is not even close. I was expecting more from the Swedes this year. They don't have as much as I thought. I was expecting more from the Finns. They're a little bit better, not as good as what I thought. I don't see anybody muddying the waters this year. It's going to be a Canada-US rematch. And unless we have a Kim Martine goaltending performance from 2006 when the Swedes upset the U.S., which I don't think we're going to have, this is going to be Canada-U.S. all the way. So tomorrow, the Tuesday afternoon game, or Tuesday morning for us, That's going to be fun. That's going to be fun to watch. But, and this is important, don't put too much into it, because the truth is the gold medal game is going to matter more. This is just kind of feeling one another out. It's going to be punch, counter punch, I think, tomorrow with Canada and the U.S.
You know, Pierre, we talked a lot before the tournament of the women's game and how the other nations around the world have ascended and become better. And I believe that's actually the case. But the problem for those other teams are, so have the U.S. and Canada. They continue to evolve the women's game to places we've never seen before. The level of hockey is so high now. And I have to tell you, this is by far the best U.S. team I've ever seen.
Me too. And I'll tell you, it starts in the back end. If you don't believe me, watch Caroline Harvey play. Caroline Harvey is one of the elite skaters in all of hockey, not women's, not men's, all of hockey. She's phenomenal. And she's just one example. Layla Edwards is another example. She plays forward for the University of Wisconsin. She's playing as a defenseman for Team USA. If you don't, the biggest thing is watch Taylor Heisey play for the U.S. Watch Alex Carpenter play for the U.S. Watch their hockey sense, their speed, their passing ability. Watch Hillary Knight score in the power play and how quickly she can elevate the puck. There's so many things, to your point, that makes this tournament so good on the U.S. side. On the Canadian side, it's the same kind of stuff.
Yeah.
They move the puck, they're physical, they get to the net, they can cycle the puck, they can score from distance. Things that didn't always happen in the women's game, it's happening now, and it's really good to watch.
It's really, really good hockey. Pierre, while I have you, it would be remiss of me to not ask you, where else is Pierre McGuire's attention during these Winter Olympics? What other sports are you most likely to tune into and pay close attention to?
For the Olympics, I love watching.
Yeah, just generally.
I love watching curling. I love watching ski jumping. And when I was doing the games, when I was actually on premises, I like to go to the speed skating. I think the speed skating is awesome. Yes. And having played professionally in Holland, when Holland was an Olympic country, I have so much respect for how they train. We used to go play in these different rinks where the hockey rink was actually inside the skating oval, and there'd be crowds of 10, 12,000 people. So you'd actually have to walk under a tunnel to get to the hockey rink to go play. So it was pretty neat. I like watching the speed skating. If I had one sport I could go to, it'd probably be the speed skating. I just think it's phenomenal.
Yeah, I think most hockey people would probably agree with that, because you watch a modern NHL game or in person now, and you're just shocked by the speed. Yeah. But you know nothing of speed on skates until you've seen speed skaters go. The amount of territory they cover and the power in their legs and their entire bodies to move through the ice that way is crazy. I'm a big fan of the ice skating, the ice dancing stuff, only because I cannot imagine the amount of pressure they are under. There's no margin for error in the ice dancing, the pair skating, and all that stuff now. And it's just watching people perform under the highest level of pressure, to me, is always the greatest thing about sports. And that's what the entire Olympics is. And you just named a lot of great sports, Pierre. I think my list is pretty much the same as yours as well.
I'm addicted to the Olympics. I feel so blessed to having had the opportunity to work them for so many years, still working it now. To do this with you is phenomenal, to talk about it. And to my right, there's a big TV screen, and all I have on there all the day long is the Olympics. So it's great, and I love doing it. It's awesome to watch.
The Olympic spirit is within you, Pierre. We will join you later in the week to talk about these first couple of Canada hockey games, of course. I'll be joining you next Sunday, immediately following Canada's game against France. Should be lots to discuss by then. Enjoy the games. Enjoy these Olympics, Pierre. They're your favorite. You're doing coverage for NBC. You're doing coverage for us. You must be in your element. I am so happy right now, Kyle. I'm so grateful to everybody at Bet Rivers Network and Toronto Sports Rush, producer Tim, yourself, Brian Monzo. I love doing this with you guys. You have no idea. I think I tell you this off the air all the time. This makes me so happy having the opportunity to do this. Thank you very much for having me. It makes us happy, and it makes me happy, Pierre. I love working on these shows with you, and I love following these Olympics with all of your enthusiasm. We appreciate you here at Toronto Sports Rush. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Join us for lots more Olympic coverage, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.